The desert evening had a way of swallowing sound, turning every whisper of wind into a secret carried across endless miles of dust and sagebrush. Clara Whitmore had lived on the frontier long enough to understand that when the land fell silent, something was about to happen, something the earth itself was holding its breath for. She had grown up watching her father work the dry land, never once losing faith that their small homestead near the edge of Apache territory would flourish. Her mother, gentle and patient, filled their cabin with warmth, and Clara, at 19, had long since learned how to milk a goat at sunrise, load a rifle at sunset, and keep her courage somewhere between her heartbeat and her breath. That evening, as a soft red sun began sinking behind the rugged Arizona cliffs, Clara walked to the creek with a water bucket swinging lightly at her side. The sky burned like embers cooling into dusk, streaked with rose and copper. She felt calm. She felt safe. And that was her mistake. A twig snapped. Clara froze. She turned slowly, gripping the bucket until her knuckles blanched. At first, she saw nothing, just twisted mesquite trees and the long shadow of an eagle circling overhead. Then the silence deepened, thickened, as if the desert itself was warning her to run. But it was too late. From behind the rocks, they came silent as spirits. Apache warriors, their faces painted with the colors of battle, their hair braided and tied with beads that clicked softly in the fading light. Their presence was like a sudden storm, swift and overwhelming. One moment, Clara was alone. The next, she was surrounded. Her heart hammered in her chest as one warrior stepped forward. He was tall, powerful, his arms corded with muscle, his expression unreadable. His dark eyes held a command that needed no words. He raised his hand, signaling her not to move. Clara swallowed hard. Fear clawed up her throat, but she held her chin high. Her father always told her fear was a tool, either it controlled you or sharpened you. She chose the latter, though her pulse thundered so fiercely she wondered if the warriors could hear it. Then the others parted, and he appeared. The Apache chief. Dasan. She knew the name, everyone on the frontier did. Tales of him drifted from camp to camp, whispered over fires. The chief whose spirit could not be broken, whose authority stretched farther than the mountains, whose warriors followed him with absolute devotion. Some called him ruthless, others called him just. Clara had always believed the truth probably lay somewhere in between. Seeing him in person, however, was something else entirely. Dasan moved like shadow and wind, each step silent but weighted with power. His presence pulled the world into stillness, as though nature itself paused to acknowledge him. His black hair fell past his shoulders, tied with strips of leather. His chest was marked with symbols of leadership, painted lines and patterns. She did not understand but felt carried meaning older than any white man's claim to the land. When he reached her, the warriors bowed their heads slightly, a gesture of respect that told Clara just how much authority he commanded. Clara stared at him, throat tight, breath trapped in her lungs. She expected cruelty in his eyes. She expected to see the ruthless chief the soldiers always warned about. But she didn't. What she saw startled her. There was strength, yes, fierce, unshakable strength. But beneath it lay something else, a depth she could not name, an intensity that felt almost searching. Dasan spoke first, his voice deep and low, carrying the weight of one who rarely repeated himself. "You walk far from your camp," he said, his English clear but marked by the rhythm of his tongue. "Too far for safety." Clara's instinct was to snap back, but her voice wavered. "This is my land, too. My family built our home here." Dasan's gaze held hers, and for a moment she felt stripped bare, as though he was seeing past her words, past her stance, past her trembling hands. "This land belongs to the spirits," he replied, "to the mountains, to the river. Long before your people came." She stiffened. "I'm not leaving." His expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes, respect or annoyance. She couldn't tell. "You do not choose," he said simply. With a slight hand gesture, he commanded 2 warriors forward. They stepped near her, not touching her but making clear she was now under their control. Clara's breath caught. She clutched the water bucket like a shield. "What are you going to do to me?" she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Dazen stepped closer. The fading sunlight brushed across his face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw, the strength in his shoulders. He smelled of smoke and cedar, of wind and dust, of someone carved from the land itself. "You will come to our camp," he said. "You will see why we watch your people, why we must know your intentions." "My family," she choked. "They will not be harmed," Dazen said. "But you must come. There is unrest. Many speak of war. The elders say we must know what your people plan." "I don't know anything about war," Clara protested. Dazen looked at her for a long moment, and she felt that strange intensity again, the sensation that he was reading her spirit, weighing her truth. "You will," he said. There was no cruelty in his voice, no threat, just certainty. The warriors surrounded her, forming a protective but imprisoning circle. Clara's breath came in short, sharp bursts as she realized her world was shifting beneath her feet. She had grown up hearing that the Apache were unpredictable, dangerous. Yet, as she looked at Dazen again, she sensed a different truth taking root. He was dangerous, yes, but not because he wanted to harm. Her doubt he was dangerous because he was powerful, because he was unyielding, because something in his gaze made her heart falter, not out of fear, but out of something she didn't have the courage to name. "Come," he said, turning with the authority of a man who expected to be obeyed. And as the warriors led her deeper into the desert, Clara felt the first hint of a fate she could not escape. Something in the chief's presence pulled her forward, though she would have denied it if asked. Something told her that her life was about to change forever, and she was right. For on that evening, between the dying sun and the rising stars, the girl from the frontier walked, willingly, though she didn't yet know it, into the heart of a man whose spirit was both feared and admired by nations. Her story had begun. The Apache camp rose out of the desert, like a world untouched by time, its fires flickering against the rough canvas of night, its horses tethered in neat rows, its people moving with the smooth rhythm of a life deeply tied to the land. Clara had imagined she'd be dragged into a place of hostility or harsh treatment. But when she first stepped between the tall wooden stakes marking the edge of the village, she felt something unexpected: structure, order, a quiet, pulsing sense of unity. Dazen walked ahead of her, flanked by 2 warriors on each side. Clara kept her chin high, even as fear twisted in her stomach. She refused to let any of them see her break. She would not cry. She would not beg. If they expected weakness from a frontier girl, they were going to be disappointed. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts. Young warriors paused mid-task, their hands stilling on bows, saddles, baskets, or drying hides. The air changed, thickened. Clara could feel the weight of every gaze, some curious, some cautious, some cold. Then came the whispers. Not loud enough to understand, but enough to feel their meaning. A white woman. Taken by the chief himself. No one dared to approach too close, but every eye followed her. Dasan stopped near the center of the camp. The firelight painted his face in copper and gold, throwing sharp shadows over his strong features. He spoke something in Apache, and a few warriors nodded, stepping back to give them space. Clara exhaled slowly. "So this is it? You bring me here to parade me in front of everyone like some kind of prize?" Dazen turned his head, and though his expression did not shift, his eyes burned with that deep, unreadable intensity. "Not a prize," he said. "A possibility." Her brows gathered. A possibility of what? That is for the elders to see. He gestured for her to sit on a woven mat near the fire. She didn't move. He noticed. You refuse, he said simply. I stand, Clara replied. He did not argue. Instead, Dazen studied her with quiet patience, like a lion watching a creature too bold for its size. You have strong spirit, he finally said. Many would kneel. You do not. Clara crossed her arms. Kneeling for you was never an option. At that, something flickered across his face, something dangerously close to amusement. The ghost of a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth before. He hid it. Her defiance intrigued him. She saw it. She hated that part of her, felt a strange thrill at the way his gaze lingered on her. A group of women stepped forward at Dazen's command. They examined Clara openly, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a tall, older woman with hair streaked in gray, spoke to Dazen in low tones. Clara tried to interpret their conversation from posture alone. She believes you mean harm, Dazen finally said, translating the woman's words. Clara clenched her jaw. Should I believe you don't? I have saved your life twice already, he answered. Once when we found you alone. Now again by bringing you here. How is kidnapping me saving my life? Dazen took a step closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the faint undertone of smoke on his skin. There are men among your people, he said slowly, who would start war with mine. They come into our land with rifles and fear, not understanding balance. If not for tonight, they would have found your body by morning across the creek where the enemy warriors watched. Clara's breath caught. Enemy warriors? Dazen's voice hardened. Not Apache. Outsiders who wish to break this land apart, she swallowed. Hard. He wasn't lying. Something in his tone told her the truth was far heavier than anything she yet understood. He gestured around them. Here, no harm comes to you, except I'm a prisoner. You are watched, he corrected. Not bound. She hated that difference mattered. But it did. As the night deepened, more of the tribe moved about the camp, cooking, weaving, sharpening arrows, caring for elders and children. Clara observed everything with a careful eye. They were not savages as the townspeople claimed. They were disciplined, graceful, fiercely connected to one another, and they respected Dazen with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Every time he spoke, people listened. Every time he moved, the camp shifted around him like a living organism adjusting to its heartbeat. Clara saw strength in him, not just physical, but spiritual, rooted in something deeper than she could yet understand. And maybe that frightened her more than anything else. Hours passed. The moon rose high, casting silver across the desert floor. Clara's legs began to tire. Finally, reluctantly, she sank onto the woven mat. Dazen watched her. Now you sit. She glared at him. Not for you. For my feet. That almost smile flickered again. He took a seat opposite her, legs crossed, posture regal and steady. You fear me, he said. Clara's chest tightened. I fear uncertainty. Then I will give you truth? He leaned forward. You will stay here until we know what your people plan. Until the elders decide what path brings peace. And if they choose war? Dazen's jaw tightened. Then you will be safe. You mean kept hostage? His voice grew low. I mean protected. Your people fight with fear. Mine fight with purpose. You will not be harmed. Clara looked at him long and hard. His certainty wasn't arrogance. It was conviction. A man who didn't waste words and didn't speak without meaning them. You don't intimidate me, she said. Not yet, he murmured. Her heart skipped because it wasn't a threat. It was a quiet acknowledgment of the weight he carried and the power she could feel radiating from him. The older women returned and offered Clara food-warm corn cakes. diced venison, a small bowl of herbs. Clara hesitated, then accepted. Trust was a fragile thread, but refusing would mean letting fear win out as she ate. Dazen watched her, not hungrily, not coldly, but as if studying the way she moved through his world. She met his gaze once, then again, and each time she looked away. Heat warmed her cheeks. It infuriated her. When she finished, she stood again, needing distance. The campfire cracked softly behind her as she stepped away. Dazen rose too. "You walk," he said. "To see the camp." "I walk to clear my head," she corrected. "Then both happen." He followed her, not too closely, but never far enough to release her from his shadow. She hated how aware she was of him, how every instinct inside her reacted when he moved. They passed warriors preparing horses, young boys practicing with wooden spears, women weaving baskets whose patterns told stories she did not yet know. Finally, Clara turned to him. "Why are you watching me so closely?" "I'm not going anywhere." Dazen stepped toward her, slow and deliberate, until she felt her back brush the bark of a nearby tree. "Because," he said softly, "you do not break. You do not kneel. You look me in the eyes even when you fear what you see." Her breath trembled. "No other captive has done this," he added. "I'm not your captive," she whispered. "Not in body," he murmured. "But in spirit, you may become something else." Her pulse stumbled. "And what's that?" Dazen didn't touch her, didn't move closer, but the air between them tightened, heavy and electric. A woman who changes everything. Clara's knees weakened, not from fear, but from the weight of his words. He stepped back at last. "Rest now. Tomorrow the elders will speak." And as Clara lay on the woven mat that night, staring at the glowing embers of the dying fire, she realized one truth with terrifying clarity. She didn't fear Dazen's power. She feared the way her heart responded to it. The storm came without warning, as though the desert itself had grown impatient with the fragile calm of day. The sky darkened in moments, clouds swirling in bruised purples and charcoal grays. Wind clawed across the mesas, rattling the wooden frames of the Apache camp, whipping dust into every corner of the open desert floor. Clara Whitmore pressed her hands to the coarse cloth of her dress, her chest tightening, her heart hammering not just from fear, but from the uncanny awareness that the night would demand more from her than she had ever known. Dazen stood at the center of the camp, unflinching as the wind tore through his long black hair. Around him, warriors moved with precision, securing tents, guiding horses, and tending to the children and elders who sought shelter in the smallest spaces they could find. His eyes, dark and fathomless, reflected the chaos around him, but betrayed nothing of the storm roiling within his own thoughts. Clara had seen him calm in moments of crisis before, but this storm tested even his legendary patience. And yet, he moved with the certainty of a man who could command not just people, but the very elements themselves, bending fear and chaos into obedience through sheer will. Clara hesitated near the edge of the camp, drawn by a mix of curiosity and fear. Her heart thudded violently in her chest as she watched. Dazen. Something about the way he bore himself in the storm made the earlier tales she had heard of his cruelty seem hollow. There was no malice in him tonight, only a raw, almost frightening intensity, the kind that demanded respect without raising a hand in anger. "You should come inside," a voice called. It was one of the elder women, her face lined with the wisdom of decades and eyes that had seen countless seasons of desert hardship. "The wind bites stronger than you think." Clara shook her head. I need to see him." She barely realized she was speaking aloud, her voice trembling against the roar of the storm. The elder woman frowned but said nothing, sensing that some invisible force had drawn Clara toward the chief. She approached Dazen slowly, her steps careful, every crunch of gravel beneath her boots lost in the storm's fury. He turned slightly as she came near, his eyes locking with hers. And then, in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, he said the words she would never forget. "Tonight, you will see my true power." Her stomach twisted. She had imagined threats, violence, the legendary fury of the Apache chief unleashed. But instead, she saw only his unwavering presence, the way he seemed to stand taller than the storm itself, a solitary figure commanding both the tribe and the elements with silent authority. The words were a warning, yes, but also an invitation. Clara swallowed hard. "Your true power?" she whispered. "What do you mean?" Dazen's eyes softened ever so slightly, as though he recognized the terror and curiosity that warred within her. "Not the strength of my arms," he said. "Not the sharpness of my blade. Not the fear I can inspire. Tonight, you will see the power I carry in my heart, the power to protect, to endure, to command without cruelty." She blinked, uncertain if she understood. Yet even as the words passed, the wind seemed to pause. The children huddled quietly near the elders. The fire flickered in respect rather than fear. Clara realized then that Dazen's power was not in destruction, but in control mastery of self, of nature, and of the spirits that guided his people. The chief began moving through the camp with purpose. He guided frightened children to safety, lifted fallen supplies from struggling warriors, and whispered words of encouragement to those whose courage wavered. Each action, each glance, each measured step carried authority. Clara's heart pounded not from fear of him, but from the stark realization that the man she had been trained to see as an enemy was a protector, a force of justice and balance. His legendary reputation was not the myth of savagery she had been told. It was the truth of a man who bore the weight of his people and land upon his shoulders without faltering. As the storm raged on, Clara saw something else. She saw Dazen stand between the howling wind and a group of elder women, shielding them with his own body, as if the storm respected him enough to bend around him, but needed a human conduit to contain its fury. She saw him reassure a young warrior who had faltered under the terror, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder and speaking words Clara could not understand but felt in the marrow of her bones. Each moment was a revelation, a lesson in what true power meant, not domination, not fear, not violence, but the capacity to hold chaos at bay while protecting those weaker than oneself. At one point, Dazen's eyes met hers across the windswept space, and Clara felt a pull she could not deny. It was not desire, not yet, but a recognition. She had been taught to distrust this man, to see him as an enemy. And yet, standing amidst the storm, she felt the undeniable truth of his presence. He was a man of unwavering integrity, unyielding courage, and a heart capable of devotion the likes of which few men on the frontier could match. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm's roar became a kind of symphony, a cacophony of wind, rain, and the muted cries of animals seeking refuge. And through it all, Dazen moved with grace and certainty. Clara watched, transfixed, as the chief transformed every threat of the storm into an act of guardianship. She saw his hands steadying a toppled tent, his voice commanding warriors to secure horses, his eyes scanning the dark horizon for dangers invisible to anyone but him. By the time the first hints of dawn began to pierce the gray clouds, Clara understood something she had not known before. She was witnessing the essence of a leader who did not need fear to command obedience. When the storm finally passed, the desert lay quiet, cleansed by the wind and rain. Mud clung to the earth, fires still smoldered in their pits, and the people of the tribe emerged cautiously, weary but unharmed. Clara approached Dazen, her steps careful, still trembling from the storm and from the torrent of emotions coursing through her. He turned as she neared, his hair damp and clinging to his forehead, his clothes streaked with mud and rain, but his posture unbroken, regal. "Commanding, you see now," he said, voice low and measured, "that my power is not in fear. It is in the strength to protect, the courage to endure, and the will to remain steadfast when all else is chaos." Clara's lips parted. I never imagined." She faltered, unsure if words could convey the awe, the trembling admiration, the reluctant respect she felt. "I thought your power was something else entirely." Dazen inclined his head slightly. "Most do," he said. "But those who survive the desert, who watch the storm pass and stand with those who are afraid, learn another kind of power. One that cannot be taken, one that cannot be broken." Her chest tightened. In that moment, she understood why he commanded not just the tribe, but the desert itself. His presence was magnetic, undeniable, a force that drew respect and loyalty effortlessly. And she realized, with a sudden clarity that scared her almost as much as the storm, that her heart was no longer hers alone to govern. It responded to him, his strength, his courage, his integrity. The storm had revealed not just his power, but the depth of her own vulnerability, the fragility of the defenses she had spent years building around herself. Dazen extended a hand, not in threat, not in possession, but in quiet invitation. Clara hesitated, then placed hers within it. It was a simple act, but in that moment, the storm became more than wind and rain. It became a bridge between two worlds. One was her old life, filled with fear and caution. The other was a life she could never have imagined, tethered to a man whose true power had nothing to do with the myths she had heard and everything to do with the strength of his character and the depth of his heart. And, as the first rays of sunlight cut through the clearing clouds, Clara understood something irrevocable. The night of truth had passed, and she had been forever changed. She would never see Dazen or herself the same way again. The days that followed the storm were marked by a quiet, almost imperceptible tension, a delicate balance between curiosity and restraint. Clara Whitmore had learned more about the Apache people in a week than she had in her entire life on the frontier. She observed their rituals, their careful ways of sustaining life in the desert, the respect they paid to every living thing, from the smallest lizard darting across the rocks to the tallest eagle cutting through the sky. But above all, she observed Dazen, the Apache chief whose presence continued to challenge everything she thought she knew about power, honor, and even her own heart. Dazen did not command her as he did his warriors. Nor did he treat her as merely a guest of the tribe. He treated her with a mix of respect and quiet scrutiny, watching her movements, gauging her reactions, noting her bravery and defiance. Every time she spoke, she felt the intensity of his attention. Every glance he offered seemed to carry an unspoken weight, the kind that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts stumble. Clara found herself both irritated and captivated, frustrated by the feelings she could neither name nor control. One afternoon, as the sun painted the desert in strokes of gold and amber, Dazen approached her while she helped one of the older women weave baskets. He spoke softly, a low rumble that cut through the quiet of the camp. "You learn quickly," he said. "Your hands move with purpose. Your spirit adapts." Clara straightened, brushing dust from her dress. "I have to survive," she replied, "and I will not be weak." Dazen's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly, and he studied her in silence. "Strength is not only in survival," he said. "It is in understanding, in patience, in the courage to face more than fear. You show more courage than most men I know." Her cheeks warmed at his words. She looked away, pretending to examine the basket, but her heart betrayed her, pounding in response to the rare and unexpected praise of a man whose opinion now mattered more than she cared to admit as the days turned into weeks. Clara and Dazen's interactions grew more intricate. He taught her the names of the stars, pointing to Orion and the Pleiades while recounting the old legends of his people. She laughed when he mispronounced English words, correcting him gently, enjoying the rare moments when the stern chief allowed a trace of humor to surface. They walked through the desert, him explaining the patterns of the land, the tracks of animals, the signs that foretold weather or danger. She began to see the desert through his eyes as a living, breathing entity to respect and honor rather than simply a place to survive. Yet the bond between them remained complicated. A tightrope walk between admiration, respect, and the dangerous stirrings of attraction. Clara knew what the tribe thought. She had heard the whispers of wariness and disapproval from the elders. They respected her courage, yes, but they knew the rules. A settler and a chief could never unite without consequence. The boundaries of tradition were clear, and yet Dazen seemed to navigate them with ease, never overstepping, but never allowing distance to sever the quiet connection growing between them. Clara, for her part, struggled with her feelings. Her family, her old life, her duties to her people tugged at her like invisible ropes. She missed them, she feared them, and yet her heart leaned toward a life she could never have imagined. A life intertwined with this man whose very presence reshaped her understanding of strength, courage, and loyalty. She hated the way he unsettled her, but she could not deny it. Then came the night that would test the fragile threads of their growing bond. The camp had settled under a sky clear of clouds, the desert breathing quietly after the storm. Dazen approached Clara while she tended to a small fire for the tribe's younger children. He did not speak immediately. He simply watched her, the moonlight catching the strong lines of his face, the shadows deepening the intensity of his gaze. Your people prepare to come, he said finally, his voice low. They believe you are in danger. They do not understand. Clara set down the small pot of water, her hands trembling slightly. I am not in danger, she replied. I am choosing to be here. Dazen stepped closer, not threateningly, but with an unmistakable gravity. Your choice will bring questions, he said, and perhaps conflict. I know, Clara admitted, meeting his gaze. And I accept it. He studied her then, as if measuring her soul against his own. For the first time, Dazen spoke of what he felt not in words of longing, but in words of acknowledgement, the rarest and most powerful form of expression in his reserved nature. You understand what this is, he said. This bond. What it could mean. What it could destroy. Clara nodded. I do, and yet I cannot turn away. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was not amusement. It was recognition. And in that moment, the tension between them seemed to hum with possibility, a life not yet written, but waiting in the desert silence, waiting for courage to claim it. The elders observed them quietly, whispering among themselves. Some disapproved, some approved cautiously. The tribe had known leaders who bridged worlds before, but never one quite like this, a chief drawn to a woman of a foreign people, a woman whose spirit matched his own. There would be trials. There would be questions. There would be threats from outside and from within. But in that instant, the bond between Clara and Dazen was undeniable. It had taken the form of small gestures, the way he handed her water without looking away, the way she met his gaze with steady defiance, the quiet understanding in moments where words were insufficient. As the night deepened, Dazen led her to a high ridge overlooking the camp. The desert stretched endlessly beneath them, mountains etched against the horizon, stars glittering in impossible clarity. He pointed to the constellations, telling her the stories of warriors and women, of battles fought and survived, of the deep respect for the land that shaped his people. You see, he said softly, everything has a place, a role, a purpose. Even you. Clara's breath caught. "Me? Yes," he said. "You are no longer a visitor. You are part of this night, this land, this people. And I will not let harm come to you, not from anyone, not even from me." Her heart stuttered at the weight of his words. She understood what he meant. His true power was not in the strength of his arms, but in the depth of his convictions, in the courage it took to care for something beyond himself, to protect, to respect, to love. And she understood another truth, that her feelings for him were no longer bound by fear or obligation, but by the growing recognition of the man he was, and the man he could allow her to become by his side. For the first time, Clara let herself acknowledge it fully, the dangerous, forbidden attraction that burned quietly in her chest. She hated the vulnerability it demanded, yet she could not deny it. She had never met a man who could both terrify and captivate her in equal measure, whose authority drew her in rather than pushing her away, whose strength offered safety without demanding submission. Dazen extended a hand. The same gesture as before, but heavier now with meaning. Clara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Not in fear, not in submission, but in recognition, in acceptance of a bond neither of them could yet name, but both understood. The desert stretched before them, the camp below bathed in the soft silver of moonlight, and for the first time, Clara imagined a future that included him not as captor or chief, not as stranger or legend, but as a man who had captured her heart without ever trying. And as they stood together, hand in hand, a quiet wind swept through the ridge, carrying the scent of sagebrush and rain-soaked earth, whispering promises neither dared to speak aloud. The bond had formed, strong and fragile at once. A connection that defied the rules of their worlds, a bond that would demand courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that could withstand fire and storm alike. In the silence of that night, Clara understood something irrevocable. She could not return to the life she had known. Her heart belonged here, to this man, to this people, and to the desert that had revealed truths she never could have imagined. And in the way Dazen held her hand, steady and warm, she felt a hope and certainty she had never felt before, the knowledge that some bonds, however forbidden, are meant to shape destinies. The sun rose pale and fragile over the desert horizon, brushing the rugged mesas with shades of gold and pink. For Clara Whitmore, the morning brought little relief. The wind was still warm, the air dry and biting, but the tension in the camp was palpable. Word had come from the settlements. Soldiers, armed and impatient, were heading toward the Apache village. They believed Clara to be a prisoner in danger, unaware of the bond she had formed with Dazen or the careful trust that existed between her and the tribe. Fear twisted in her chest, but it was a strange, sharp kind of fear, one not of the chief, but of the coming violence that could shatter everything she had come to hold dear. Dazen stood before the camp, silent and commanding as always. His warriors had gathered, forming a protective barrier around the heart of the village. His eyes scanned the horizon, dark and unyielding. Yet beneath the layers of authority and fearlessness, Clara glimpsed a rare vulnerability. He was preparing not just for defense, but for the impossible choice of preserving life over pride. She stepped closer, feeling the pull between them, the unspoken words that hung heavy in the crisp morning air. "They are coming," she said, barely above a whisper. Dazen's jaw tightened. "They believe they can take what belongs to them. They do not understand this land. They do not understand us." His voice was low, steady, the kind that carried not anger, but the weight of inevitability. Clara's fingers brushed against his arm, a fleeting contact that sent warmth through her despite the chill. "I am with you," she said, and even as the words escaped, she knew they carried far more meaning than mere allegiance. She meant it. She would not return to the settlements. Not while he stood here, risking everything for the people he loved and for her. The soldiers arrived by midday, their dust-choked horses kicking up clouds of dirt, rifles gleaming under the harsh desert sun. The sight of them drew a murmur through the Apache camp. Women and children retreated to tents. Warriors tightened grips on spears and bows. Clara felt her heart hammer not from fear of Dazen, but from the knowledge that despite his power, the outcome was uncertain. She could only hope that reason would prevail over the instinct for blood. Dazen stepped forward, unarmed, his posture steady and unwavering. The soldiers dismounted, their captain striding forward, rifle raised but brow furrowed with unease. The desert seemed to hold its breath as the two sides faced each other, flesh against flesh, fear against courage, the unbending resolve of a chief against the impatience of armed men. Step back. The captain barked. This woman is under our protection. You have no right. I have no need for protection from outsiders. Dazen interrupted, voice ringing clear across the sand. She is not your property, and you will not harm her or mine. The soldiers hesitated, confused by his calm authority. His presence was magnetic, unshakable, a force that demanded both respect and caution. The air between them was charged, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Clara stepped forward beside him, her hand lightly touching his arm again. This time, it was no fleeting gesture, it was a statement. She was not afraid. She would not be moved, and she belonged here. To this man and the life he represented. The standoff stretched, tense and fragile. The desert heat pressed down, and the quiet among the soldiers grew uneasy. Then, in a moment that would decide fate, Dazen spoke again, voice carrying the authority of one who did not merely command warriors but commanded the very land itself. You came seeking what you cannot take, he said. I ask only for peace. Leave now, and no harm will come to any of you. A murmur passed through the soldiers, doubt flickering across their faces. Dazen's gaze met Clara's, and in that glance she saw a depth of care and determination that made her chest ache. He was not asking for compliance. He was offering reason. He was holding back the storm within himself for the sake of those around him. It was in that moment she truly understood the extent of his power. It was in restraint, in love, in unwavering protection. Her heart refused to let her step back. She stood tall beside him. I am with him, she declared, voice ringing across the clearing. I choose to stay. I am not afraid. The soldiers faltered. Some lowered their rifles, uncertainty breaking through their rigid formation. The captain took a cautious step back, realizing the futility of force against a man whose authority was absolute and whose cause was just. Finally, he raised a hand in reluctant acknowledgement. We go, he said, tension still lingering in every syllable dot as the soldiers withdrew. The camp exhaled. The children emerged, the elders smiled with relief, and the warriors slowly relaxed, though their vigilance remained. Clara turned to Dazen, eyes wide, heart still racing. He looked at her, and for the first time, the intensity in his gaze softened entirely, replaced by a warmth that made her pulse quicken. You are safe, he said, and in that simple declaration lay more than reassurance. It carried the weight of commitment, of promise, of a depth of feeling that could not be denied. And you are yours to choose. Clara smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. I choose. You, she whispered. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from relief, from joy, from the knowledge that she had found a man whose power was measured not in strength or conquest, but in love and protection. Dazen stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her cheek. The touch was gentle, respectful, yet carried the undeniable authority of the man he was. And then, slowly, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss that spoke of battles fought and endured, of storms weathered and survived, of hearts recognizing each other across the vast and unforgiving desert. It was a kiss that sealed a promise neither had spoken aloud but both understood fully. Their bond was stronger than fear, stronger than war, stronger than any boundary imposed by the world around them. The tribe gathered around, witnessing a moment that transcended conflict. Even the elders, who had observed from the shadows with cautious eyes, nodded in approval. They understood that the bond between Clara and Dason was forged in courage, trust, and mutual respect, a union that honored both worlds, not through force, but through the choice of hearts meeting across divides. That night, under the wide expanse of desert stars, Clara and Dason were married in the simplest, most profound way. Fires burned gently across the camp, the moon casting silver light on the faces of the tribe and the couple. Words were few, but the meaning was clear. Vows were spoken not in formal ritual, but in gestures of care, of protection, of promise. Clara wore a simple dress, woven by the hands of the women who had first tested her courage. Dason's ceremonial feathers caught the moonlight, highlighting the pride and authority of a man who had earned not just the loyalty of his people, but the devotion of a woman whose spirit matched his own. And as they stood together, hand in hand, the desert wind whispering through the canyon, Clara finally understood the truth of the chief's earlier words. His true power was not in what he could destroy, but in what he could protect, nurture, and love. The soldiers never returned. Peace settled over the valley, fragile yet enduring. Clara learned the ways of the tribe fully, her days filled with work, teaching, learning, and love. Dason remained the steadfast chief, respected and revered by his people. But he was also a man changed by the woman who had defied him, challenged him, and ultimately joined him in a bond that was equal parts passion, respect, and devotion. Together they walked the desert ridges, watched the sun rise and fall over the mesas, and faced the challenges of the frontier with a unity that neither fear nor hatred could sever. Their love, forged in the crucible of danger and tested by fire and storm, became a legend of its own, a story whispered among settlers and Apaches alike, of a frontier girl and a chief whose bond proved that true power lies not in domination, but in courage, honor, and love strong enough to withstand the fiercest storms. And in the quiet of the desert night, as Clara lay beside Dason under the endless sky, she finally understood the life she had chosen. A life with a man whose heart was as strong as the land itself, whose love was as enduring as the mesas, whose presence could calm the wildest storm. And she knew, beyond doubt, that whatever came next, they would face it together, their hearts beating in unison, their bond unbreakable, their love eternal.